All right, so the recording just kicked off and we'll be starting now officially. So before I get right, to be a pleasure to introduce my assistant teacher who will be helping me um co-teach or co-assist this class today. And that will be I think Jeremiah he's in the call, right? Yeah, Jeremiah Uyeniran. Jeremiah, could you just probably unmute your mic and say hi? If you can hear me, can you just unmute your mic and say hi? Yeah, I don't think we can hear you, Jerry. All right, I think Jerry is having network issues. Well, basically the role of Jerry right during the call is Jerry is going to be helping with taking the attendance. We're going to be taking attendance um during the progression of the class, right? Like I said, it's an important criteria as to who stays, who gets evicted. So please, as much as you can, try to be available for every class. And he will also be helping with the charts because sometimes it's very difficult to be presenting my slides or going through whatever I'll be teaching today, and at the same time still be attending to questions in the chat. So he's going to help attend to questions as to the best of his knowledge, right? And if there's anything he needs to bring to my attention, he would do that. All right. I think we've said a lot. I don't think we are missing anything. So I guess that would be it, right? So I'm just going to share my screen and we could get started. All right. So today we're definitely not going to be writing codes. We're going to be doing something that's very, very important to the success of this bootcamp. The ability or the extent to which you comprehend whatever is going to be said between this class and the next class will go along with determining your success with this bootcamp. Because one of the things I tell people right is with with Web3. Okay, let me just put this and say that out right. Yeah, so with Web3 development, basically, unlike Web2 development, is really about, yeah, writing codes are important, but knowledge is very, very much very important. And that's one of the reasons why you have to be an avid reader if you're going to survive in the space. For probably, as we all know, right, the space is quite young. You get like um Ethereum itself was released in like 2015, right? And there's been very um there's been quick rapid changes that have been made to the ecosystem, right? But a lot of things are still new. The ecosystem is still changing. It's still very much flexible. Things are not as rigid as you have it in the Web2 ecosystem, right? So one of the things that would help you scale as a blockchain developer is your ability to read, right? To read documentation, to read articles, to get other people's thoughts on things, right? It would help you a lot during the course of your journey. So I would really need us that we pay rapid attention and pay attention to the class D, right? Because it's going to form so we're going to be trying to give you the fundamental knowledge you would need to scale through the bootcamp. So we have the bootcamp curriculum somewhere here. This is what I talked about, right? Let's see if I can share this. Yep. So these are our curriculum basically for the bootcamp. As you can see, between this is going to be we're going to record this as the first contact. So between today and tomorrow, we're going to be looking at an introduction to blockchain and the Ethereum virtual machine, and we're going to be looking into some blockchain basics such as consensus, wallets, transactions, cryptography, and so on and so forth. Just paste this in the chat. Someone's saying my voice is low that they can't hear me well. Is that true? Can you guys hear me? Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you.
Like very clearly, right? Okay. People said yes. Right. Claudine, I think there might be an issue with your network. Maybe try going out and joining in again. Right. I think Jerry's back now. So Jerry, could you probably unmute your mic and say hi?
Oh, hello everyone. My name is Jeremiah. You know that I'm live. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, okay. So I'm a blockchain developer and I'm part of blockchain N tutor for this course. So it's nice having you guys around. I know we enjoy
Yeah,
ourselves in this course. Thank you.
yeah. Thank you so much, Jerry. All right. So going forward, right? Like I said earlier, blockchain 101 Web3 VM smart contracts. So basically, if you're around for the developer breakout session we had during the conference, right? We this some of the slides here were part of what we're supposed to have presented. So if you were in that developers workshop, you probably have heard some of this and probably the see repetition is meant for emphasis, right? Hearing this in the second time should probably make you understand it better. But if you were not here at then, right, I'll still try my best to like make things simpler. This is just like a QR code to scan if you probably want to get document. But I think that's not necessary since I'll be sharing the document with those later on the group chat. So basically, brief introduction. Who do not know me, right? My name is Darlington Nnam, and I'm currently the dev lead at Blockchain UNN. So you could catch me up on Twitter at Xerex Darlington, and the Telegram. There's no need for my Telegram though, but you could um catch me up on Twitter, on WhatsApp. Okay, so introduction and presentation. For course outline today, we're going to be looking at introduction to blockchains. We're going to be taking a deep dive into consensus mechanisms. We're going to be looking at Web3, the third generation of the internet. We're going to be looking at the Ethereum virtual machine. We're going to be looking at smart contracts, what's smart about them. We're going to be taking a deep dive into blockchain wallets, transactions. The idea of, like I said earlier, of going into all these rights is because you're going to encounter these time and time and time again during the bootcamp. So what I'll try to do between today and the next our next contact, right, is try to ensure that we get a very solid foundational knowledge of this. And if you have any questions, if you're bold enough to unmute your mic, please do so. Mute your mic. Please raise your hand so we don't get disorganized. So probably give a special time for questions. You can just write them down so you don't forget. All right. So we are going to be using some certain materials, right? So although I have slides here, but my slides, there are very little things that can go into a slide. So the slide is just like a brief overview, but we're going to be using some very important documents. For example, please guys mute your mic so you don't interrupt the class. We're going to be using the Ethereum docs, official Ethereum docs. Uh, prep that mode. Yeah, so we're going to be using the official Ethereum docs to look at some certain things, and then something I enjoy reading a lot, right? And I think there's a link to it in the recommended doc session. Is what's it called? Ethereum book. Mastering Ethereum here. So we're going to be using this too. So it's going to be helpful. Yep. So basically, let's get started. Right, introduction to blockchains. So when we talk about blockchain, what's the first thing that comes to mind, right? Basically, we always defining the it's very simple way of defining blockchain, right? It's like a blockchain is simply a way of recording or storing information in a way that makes it difficult to change, cheat, or hack the system. And this is a very simplified definition. We're going to go into like a very much more technical definition. We'll probably define the blockchain as we'll always define it as a distributed ledger that this blah 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 blah. But we try to make sure that we keep things simple. But then when I don't think it's impossible, right, to talk about the blockchain without bringing in the concept of distributed systems, because basically the blockchain itself is a distributed ledger technology, so it's a distributed system. And basically the research on distributed systems existed way before the idea of the blockchain came in, right? So the idea of distributed systems have like existed since I can't tell the 80s, 90s. There's always been an area of research in computer science, and a lot of persons had made progress in it. In fact, there were distributed systems that existed even way before the blockchain. Sorry about that. In Nigeria, they just took the light, so I'll probably have to switch my display a minute. Right, guys, a minute. Let me try to disconnect this. Okay. Can you guys see my screen? If you can,
Yes.
right. I don't think so. I'm coming. Share, still share my secondary screen. Um, All right, so I believe you should be able to see my screen now, right? Did I get feedback? You guys can see my screen now, right?
Yeah, your screen is
All right.
visible.
Yes.
All right. Sorry about that. So, I was talking about blockchains, right? And I said the blockchain itself is a distributed ledger system, right? And the concept of distributed systems, like I said, had existed way before blockchains came into play, right? And for example, I think the research on distributed systems had gone so far that I think we had some this, for example, I don't know if anybody heard about, was it Napster? I think it was Napster that was the file sharing platform that was that made use of distributed systems, and we had a few others too. Like for example, I was listening to this podcast by what's the name of this professor, right? He's the I think he's currently the co-founder of Ava Labs, that's the company in charge of Avalanche, and he too had made a lot of progress in the research of distributed systems. That was way before Bitcoin came out. Well, the introduction of Bitcoin, right, turned everything around. Basically, that was when the blockchain revolution began. Because, I mean, all these things had existed together, but there was this anonymous side then. And this anonymous person or anonymous identity, nobody still knows who this person or this group of persons are, right, called Satoshi Nakamoto, who came in and was able to piece two and two together, right, and was able to build a distributed system where things could be controlled using a certain consensus mechanism known as proof of work. So basically, at this point, he now had a totally decentralized system, which was a way of recording or storing information in things we call block, right? So initially, I think it was the name blockchains basically came out of the fact that blockchains are a chain of blocks. So you have blocks which contain different transactions, right? And once a block is filled up, the next block becomes refers to the previous block and then contains more transactions. So basically, as you can see with this image, right, you just have something like this, and most you have blocks joining to the other blocks to form a chain of blocks, right? And that was basically how the name blockchain came about. So going back to where we started from, right? We said the blockchain is like a simple way of recording or storing information in a way that makes it difficult to change, cheat, or hack the system. So, a certain example I would always use to, I always like to use to explain blockchains, to break it down to to layman understanding, right, is, let's say we have this certain organization. Let's say everybody on this call currently is part of an organization, and in this organization, right, we have this certain financial book where we tend to record financial informations as pertaining to this organization. Now let's assume we have someone. Let's say Jerry, for example, is our fintech or treasurer. I don't know, whoever keeps the money, right? But one of the things we do not want to do, right, is we do not want to trust Jerry with them. Jerry is the fintech now, or yeah, Jerry is the fintech. Now we could say we have this financial book and Jerry is in charge of it. But the problem of having just Jerry control our financial book, right, is the fact that if Jerry is the only person in control, there's nothing that stops Jerry from like altering the information in that financial book. So let's say we carried out our organization needs something, right, and maybe we needed to buy something, we're trying to build a project and all, and the let's say the total funds allocated for the project, or the total expenses after every plus and minus, right, was supposed to be ₦1 million. Jerry now is the one in charge of the financial book. There's nothing that stops Jerry from, let's say, adding 100K to the ₦1 million, making it a million 100K, and nobody will even know, because he just needs to make sure he keeps a clean record. And most persons will probably not know that, okay, Jerry just cheated the system and stole 100K, right? So but just imagine if all of us, meanwhile Jerry is the chief financial secretary, right, but we still, each person within the organization still has a copy of that financial book. Now this is how the blockchain works basically. As you can see now, each person has a copy of that financial book we are talking about. Now every time we carry out a financial record, for that financial record to be valid, right, we want to make sure that that change, if it is added to Jerry's book, is going to be added to every single person in that organization's book. So everybody's record must be up to date. And in a case where, let's say, more than 50% of persons do not have a financial record that probably is in Jerry's book, we can assume that Jerry manipulated the system and added it, because I mean everybody's record book is supposed to be up to date, but yours has something that others do not have. So we could assume that you manipulated it. Now this is basically how the blockchain works. Now in the case of the blockchain, right, each within the organization can be considered what we call a node. So a node basically is just think of it as a server within the blockchain. So what these nodes do now is, okay, when you look at what we call centralized systems, right? Let's see all these big companies, right? So basically, you know that they are the ones running their own servers, they're the ones running their own node. And one of the big disadvantages about that is we know about outages, right? Outages happen with most of all these big tech companies. For example, well, we encounter outages with WhatsApp, we encounter outages with Facebook, and so on and so forth. This is because these guys run their servers by themselves. These are centralized servers. So if anything should happen to Facebook headquarters, let's say that the light goes off, right? It affects the whole world, right? Because there's just this single server which is managing everything that goes on within Facebook, right? That takes care of the record and all. But within the blockchain, it is different. It's called distributed, because rather than have just one node control the whole blockchain, any person can stand up and spin a node and connect to the blockchain. And in so doing, if it is a full node, right, going forward, if we have the time, we're going to look at difference between nodes. We're going to be looking at full nodes, like client nodes, and so on and so forth. So if it is a full node, we assume that you have the complete record that other nodes in the blockchain have. So just like you can see in this picture, right? Let's assume this is my node, this is Jerry's node, this is Peter's node, this is so on and so forth. So every single person is running a node, and each node contains a full copy of the blockchain. Now this is what we call a distributed system. So in a case where let's assume my node was a central node, right? In a case where I go off or something happens, let's say the lights they took the light just like they did now, and I'm the one running a central node, right? Even if I go off, the blockchain should be able to continue. So the blockchain should be able to continue even without my presence, right? And that's because these other persons have a record of the blockchain, like have a full record of everything going on in the blockchain. So let's say a user is trying to pull information, because basically the internet functions just push and pull of data, right? Data request and so on and so forth. So basically, a user who's probably trying to request data can probably try to request from my node and see it is down. But then the user doesn't have to worry because this guy, every other person is probably live. I don't know if you get. So that's just basically how a distributed system works. Now, basically, blockchain is composed of four important layers. We have the data layer, we have the network layer, we have the consensus layer, and we have the application layer. The data layer, we're probably not going to concern ourselves with that during this introduction because it's something you can probably read more on later, but it's something you probably not worry about during most of your time as an application developer. So, but the network layer basically uses what we call, for example, in Bitcoin and Ethereum, for the network layer, there is what we call the gossip protocol. Let's see if we can take a look at that. I can't exactly think of where we could find that networks. This is the reason I wanted us to schedule this call so we don't have people joining in within the call. I can't exactly know. I don't exactly know where to find, but you can just check up these docs later. But because of time, I'm just going to give a brief explanation of how the gossip protocol thing works, right? So basically how it works now is like I said earlier, the gossip protocol is used by Ethereum and Bitcoin, for those two, right? So basically, how it works is we have this network of computers connected, right? Like I said earlier, these are nodes. So don't let those big English confuse. Like I said, nodes are just like servers or participants within the blockchain, right? Now, going back to our initial analogy of an organization where we have persons, everybody has a record book, right? And each time the financial secretary carries out a record, it has to be known to every single participant so they can put it down in their record book. And then when each time we check and see that it's in every participant's record book or majority of the participant record book, we can assume that that's a valid a valid transaction, right? So how exactly do you think we could communicate that data effectively or communicate each transaction or each change made to one node effectively to every single other node? Now that's basically where the gossip protocol team comes in, right? So just think of it like this. So we know what it means to gossip, right? So basically, I share my secrets with I share my secret with Jerry. Jerry, sorry I'm using your name so much. But let's say I share my secret with Jerry, right? And most times I tell him, do not tell anybody. Well, probably because Jerry talks a lot, right? Um in our side of the world, I will we'll say Jerry's a gossiper, right? You'll now carry my secret and go and tell another person, and probably tell the person, don't tell anybody. That person will carry my secret and go and tell another person and tell the person, don't tell anybody. Before you know it, everybody hears of it, but we still think it's a secret, an open secret. So basically that's how nodes within the blockchain communicates, right? That's how the network layer works. So basically on a very high level, right? I would let's say I'm the one who carries transaction, right? I get to add the block to the blockchain. When the change is made to my own node, right, made to my own server or made to my own node, I'll basically communicate that to the nearest node. So that nearest node next to me, I'll communicate it to him. He will communicate it to the nearest node next to him, and to just continue like that till every single node within the blockchain hears of that new transaction that was added and updates their own node until like the whole blockchain is in sync. So that's just basically how the network layer works in a very high level sense. But we're going to be focusing mostly on the consensus layer and the application layer. The application layer is definitely going to be our main focus as during the course of this bootcamp. We are mostly looking at application level development. So we are training you to become basically decentralized application developers. And I think in our previous tweets, someone asked what a decentralized application is. So think about when we talk about decentralized applications, we talk about applications that are built on a decentralized system, such as the blockchain. So, for example, we have different applications which are built on the blockchain. I don't know how many of us have interacted with some of them. Compound, MakerDAO, there's Uniswap, which is very popular. We have a lot of them that basically build on a distributed systems such as Ethereum. So these are what we call decentralized applications. Right. So just going forward, we're going to be looking next at what consensus mechanisms are. But before then, I would have preferred we look at the evolution of the web. Let's just look at that before we come back to consensus mechanism. I'm just going to move this forward. So that's right. I've edit right. I'm just going to do that later. So before we go on to look at the consensus layer, right? Or consensus mechanisms, basically, let's. I would like us to take a look at the evolution of the web. So there's this cliche term we always using, alright, when we talk about blockchains, we talk about Web3, and people always hype Web. In fact, if you are very up to date, you'd have probably heard about Web5, which is the internet built by what's the name of these guys again? TBD. That's mostly championed by Jack Dorsey, former CEO of Twitter, right? So, but basically, when we talk about Web3, what do we talk about? People say it's the third generation of the internet, it's the future of the internet, blah, 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 blah. So, in this section, we're basically going to look at how far the web has evolved, right? And how we got to this point. So, we now talk about Web3. All right. So, basically, when the internet was created, when we talk about web 1.0, right, it refers to like the first stage of the world wide web evolution. When the internet was created, there were just very few persons who could create content in on the internet, right? So today we have content creators, everybody's a content creator, enter TikTok, you twerk, you do this, you do that, you make funny videos, you can even make it in life these days without even talking. Thanks to how far the web has evolved, right? You can make a lot of money from being a content creator, but how did we exactly get there? So when the internet was in the baby stage of the internet, right? When the internet was created initially, there were very, very few content creators. And that was because for you to create content on the web, for you to be able to put out information on the web, right? You need to be very technical, like you need to be a developer, you need to be a nerd, you need to know how to basically write whatever I think Ajax or so on that they're using then, right? You need to understand how static pages works, you need to understand how TCPs and the whole internet blah 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 BS worked, right? And most persons were not that technical or did not have access to such technical informations. So only those who did, right, were the ones who were able to put content on the web. So unlike how you can probably sign up on Facebook. Let me see who's trying to join. Just admit them. Right. So on like how you can just sign up on Facebook or sign up on Wikipedia and put information on the web, right? So it's not like that in the initial version of the internet. So basically, it was we had more of consumers, we had more persons consuming information than we had people putting up information. Then advertisement was a hot deal, right? Because I mean, like, you need if you were going to make advertisements for whatever it is on the internet, right? You need to meet the developer, you need to meet someone who could probably write codes, right, to have understanding of these things, or probably meet all these companies that had these people building these things, right, to put most of all these advertisements. And so that was it basically. Like I said earlier, um, personal web pages and the rest were not common because I mean you have to pay a lot of money to get things up on the internet. But thanks, I think by 2004, right, we moved over. That was when the World Web 2 became famous. So that was due to the first Web 2 conference, which was held by Tim O'Reilly and Bill Doherty. So the term was coined by Darcy Dinucci in 1999, and basically refers to the current generation of the internet that we are all very familiar with, right? And basically, this generation of the internet is more focused on having user-generated content, creating usability and interoperability for end users. So you can see this generation of the internet was mostly pioneered by social media, right? We now started seeing a lot of social medias come up. For example, Facebook was invented, and it was so cool because it enabled anybody just sign up, create an account, and you were able to put stuff on the internet even without being technical. So you could just sign up on Facebook, you could sign up on Instagram, upload your fine pictures, and before you know it, people could search your name probably on a search engine like Google, and your information, your Instagram page will probably pop up, or your LinkedIn page will probably pop up. And things were already so much easier, right? Before you know it, we had on CMS systems like WordPress that would enable you even create personal websites without even knowing a shit, or even giving like knowing anything at all about how web development works basically. So the idea of Web2 was to give users the ability to create content, put content on the internet, participate in the web without exactly understanding how the technical part of the internet works, right? So if you are familiar with, let's say, backend development, it is when we talk about Web2, we talk about the code system, right? So code needs to read, update, delete. So when you're building like an application, you want to ensure that users have the ability to create stuffs, to read stuff, to update stuff, and to delete stuff. I think that's like the four major components that form like a proper Web2 application. Now, basically, we now started hearing about Web3, right? Before you know it, because Web2 had existed since 1999, became famous in 2004. Of course, the internet needed a little more evolution. It felt like things can be better. So I think the term Web3 applications initially were used to how do I put this? It was used to refer to artificial intelligence and learning related applications. So, but basically, this is when we talk about Web3 applications, we refer to applications which are built on a distributed ledger technology or distributed ledger system, such as the blockchain. And the whole idea of Web3 application, right, is to give control of data back to the users. So, unlike the current web, to understand what I mean by giving control of data back to the users, we have to first understand one of the biggest pitfalls that Web2 applications had. Sorry, please give me a minute. Sorry about that, breaking it up, friend. All right. Hope you guys can still hear me. Mm,
Yes, can see hear you.
yeah, sorry about that. Sorry about that. I had to attend to something. Then I came back and I don't know how my tabs went. You were right. Let's just go back to what we are talking about. Yeah, so I said to properly understand what I mean by control of giving control of data back to the users, right? We have to get a good understanding of the pitfalls that Web2 applications had. So while Web2 companies, right, most of all these, when we talk about Web2, I think the giants of the Web2 industries are probably what we refer to as FANG, right? Facebook, currently known as Meta. We have we have Amazon, we have Apple, we have Netflix, we have Google. I think these are currently the giants of the Web2 industry. So basically, while these companies they came in and they to a very large extent they made life easy for end users, right? Using the internet basically became more fun, became more addictive and all. But they had one very big major pitfall. I don't know if anybody has ever thought about how um these big companies basically make money. Like, how do you think they make money? Because I mean, like, I don't think we don't pay money to use Facebook, we don't pay money to use Instagram, we don't pay money to use Twitter. Of course there are probably stuff like Twitter Blue, and maybe there, I don't know if there's something like that for Instagram and so on. We don't also pay money to use WhatsApp and the rest, but like these guys are still like able to generate a whole lot of money. How do you think they are able to generate that much money, right? So I remember when I was very little, right, as a kid, I used to think that basically these companies they made money from my data, my mobile data, basically. So while MTN was sucking me all those plenty data, they were sucking me Facebook and Google and the rest were making a lot of money from that. But that was actually a very wrong mentality. The money for your data does not leave MTN's office, does not leave Glo's office. So basically, how these guys made a lot of money was through advertisement. To through advertisement, basically. So with while the new internet came in and brought a lot of things, right, it also made advertisement very much easier. And there are a lot of businesses who were looking to ensure that their advertisements were not wasted, because with the initial version of the internet, you could put advertisements online, but it was very difficult to target the kind of users you were expecting. So it will more likely be like, okay, if I was expecting this kind of users, for example, I was like, I'm selling clothes and shoes, right? I'll probably want to put my ad on something that's e-commerce related or so on. But it was very difficult to target some specific audience like they do today. So these Web2 companies, they came in and while they made the internet interesting for the end users, they also made advertisement easier for like business owners and advertisers, right? So would sign up or provide a whole lot of information. There were a whole lot of tracking and a whole lot of monitoring going on. These guys were monitoring your behavior, your behaviors, and a whole lot of other things. And these informations were being stored and sold to advertisers. So you probably wonder how it is possible these days that you were probably chatting with your friend on Facebook about how this shoe was entering your eye or how you needed boots, and then boom, you enter Google and the first advertisement that pops up to your eyes is Jumia telling you how you should come and buy their boots and all. So this thing now became very, very frustrating and annoying, because it's more like we no longer have privacy on the internet. In fact, you'll be very surprised that Google has more information about you than your close sibling does. Because in as much as you've been on the internet for a very long time, they've been tracking your informations, they've been doing a whole lot of other things that you do not even have an idea of. And then while we could argue that, in fact, we could argue that these informations were provided willingly by us. I mean, because like when you sign up to use most of all these applications, right, social medias and the rest, there's all these long agreements that pops up with data consent and a whole lot of other things which nobody reads. If there's anybody that reads, raise up your hand. That I mean, I'll applaud you, but I don't think anybody reads that, because reading that alone should be making you like, are people raising their hands? That guy's whining me. So people read that stuff. Wow. I know I've never read that stuff in my life. I just click approve and I move on with my life. Well, um so basically, in fact, I think my one of my friends was making a joke of all those things. He said the reason why that thing is always long is because they don't want you to read it. Because I mean, if you want to give me data agreement, allow me to know what I'm, or at least put the parts that are interesting in bold in view. But then they will hide it within all those dumb text, and most times you don't even have an idea of what you're approving. So that's just basically how it works. So
Hello, Darlington.
Can you guys hear me now?
Oh, can you hear you now?
I got muted, but I don't know how I actually did it. Sorry about that.
Okay.
I don't know. Where did you guys lose me?
When you are talking about how they keep all those data information inside the long terms and conditions.
Okay, yeah. So basically, I was just saying, if they really wanted me to read all those things, right? They should be a too long. Did you read like a TLDR before all those long texts? Probably TLDR. We're going to use your data. We are going to sell them to advertisers. That would make me think twice before opening Facebook, opening Instagram. So, but they just hide it within all those things, and so that was the problem with web applications. Basically, the internet was if he enabled us with internet easily, but these guys were doing a whole lot of shit with our data without even our permission. So the whole idea Web3 brings in, right, is Web3 applications aim to give you control of this data. So they are aiming to give you back control of this data. And that is possible because, for example, when we talk about Web3 now, like I said earlier, if you're a backend developer, you probably do that um, the core foundation of Web3 application is built on code, create, read, update, delete, right? But Web3 now will bring in create, read, update, delete, and own. So Web3 basically you are giving the right to own pieces of the internet. And you ask me how is that possible? Do you know that you could actually be a very core participant of, let's say, Ethereum, basically of the decentralized web? And how do you do that? Basically you do that by running or spinning a node. Hopefully, if we don't look at that in details in this class, we'll try to look at it in details, but we're not going to run any node. My system doesn't have that much space. But then the whole idea is you can spin up a node, you can run a node, and you can basically participate very actively in the internet. You can be a very core participant of the internet. That was one of the advantages Web3 gave to the normal user. So you now mattered a lot basically because all you needed to participate in the internet was just a willingness to. It was just a willingness to. So also when we talk about Web3 applications, so these applications basically are what we know as decentralized applications. So that most decentralized applications are not even interested in taking your data. For example, Uniswap doesn't care what your name is. Uniswap doesn't care where your father is from. Uniswap doesn't care where your mother is from. All he knows is just connect your wallet address and you can carry out swaps. You get, so although there's a certain part of Web3 which mostly likely need your data. For example, if you are looking to integrate with, let's say you're building a Web3 application which is going to probably have to get money to the bank or get money out of the bank. These are what we call centralized applications do even within the Web3 space. We have stores like Binance, we have stores like Moonpay, all these on ramp, off ramp applications, right, which would always need to interact with your bank to get money in and out of it. So if you are going to be interacting with Web2, definitely you're going to need KYC, which is also known as know your customer, or AML, anti-money laundering scheme, right? So this is where most times there might be a need for your data, but a completely decentralized application is not in any way interested in how or what um your name is or who you are. All right. So this is the issue I didn't want us to face. And I said everybody should try to join in. We joined almost 13. Sorry about that. Right. So back to what we're saying, right? So also when we talk about Web3 applications, we also refer to artificial intelligence and machine learning, which has to a very long extent allowed computer to evaluate data in the same manner that people do, allowing for like intelligent development and dissemination of information based on the user's individual requirements. So for example, we can see the evolution that is going on in AI. A lot of us are familiar with ChatGPT and how very much advanced it is, right, and how it can literally give you solution to most of your problems. So basically that's the evolution of the web in a very summarized sense, right? So don't let anybody confuse. Anytime we talk about Web3, we talk about, just know we're talking about applications that are running on the decentralized internet. So we're talking about applications running on the blockchain. All right. So basically, the next thing we're going to go Before going into the event, we're going to go back to look into consensus mechanisms. We're going to go back to look into consensus mechanisms. Okay, someone was asking, let me just try to go through the chat and see if there are any questions just before we move forward. Someone was asking, can you give us one example of a decentralized system? When we talk about decentralized systems, basically we are referring to the blockchains. So we are looking at types of blockchains. You probably have heard of Bitcoin, you've probably heard of Ethereum, you've probably heard of Avalon. Keep muting itself. Hmm. Right. Can you guys still hear me? Okay. Yeah, so basically when we talk about decentralized system in the aspect of this bootcamp, right, we talk about the blockchain. The blockchain is a decentralized distributed system. Okay, so back to where we are, talking about consensus mechanisms. All right, so when we talk about consensus mechanisms, most times what often comes to our mind is proof of stake, proof of work, authority, and so on and so forth. Those hands, so what exactly are those? How much data would you need to put in a block to be filled up? Well, that's very much dependent on how it blockchain is built, right? Because different blockchains come with different block sizes. So blocks come in different sizes, and there have been a lot of argument within the space on probably to increase block sizes, to probably increase scalability and be able to fit more data into a block, right? But that still comes into its own disadvantages. But that's how much data does it does not exactly have like a straight answer. You could check probably how much, I think how much transactions is on Ethereum, or it just depends on the blockchain. Chuku is asking, a block is a single ledger, right? A block is a single ledger. So a block is not a single ledger. When we talk about blocks, right? How do I explain this in simpler terms, right? The blockchain itself is the distributed ledger. Now, a ledger is not, I think a ledger is a big English. So when we talk about ledgers, if I am not mistaken, right? So when we talk about ledgers, we talk about record books. So a book basically used to record informations, let's say transaction financial informations, right? So the blockchain is that distributed book. Is that book? Let's forget the distributed in it. Now, inside the blockchain, we can look at blocks as pages that form that book. So what we have, we have a book, right? Inside the book, we have pages. Now, the pages are where we write down informations. So you write in a page. If that page gets filled up, you turn the page and start filling up the next page. The next page gets filled up. You turn the page and start filling up the next page. Now that's simply how a blockchain works, basically. So the blockchain itself is the ledger, that it is the book, right? And the block are the pages within the ledger. The block basically are the pages within the blockchain. So the block is where you fit in transaction, and this transaction they link to one another, forming the blockchain in itself. So the blockchain is a distributed ledger. The block is like a page in the ledger. I don't know if that answers your question, Somtochko. Right, I'm not getting a response. Well, let's just move on. It's running out of time.
Yes, thank you.
All right, let's just move on because of time. So I was about to talk about consensus mechanisms, right? And I said most times when we talk about consensus mechanisms, right, we often use that. The thing that comes to mind is if you've probably been in the blockchain ecosystem for a while, when you hear consensus mechanism, you things that come to your mind is probably proof of work, proof of stake, proof of authority, proof of this, proof of that, right? But those are not consensus mechanisms. They are actually just components in consensus in a consensus mechanism, right? But the reason why these things are colloquially referred to as also consensus mechanisms is because they are one of the most important components that form a consensus mechanism. But basically, what they are usually used to do, right, is they are used to protect against what we call CBO attacks. Let's protect against, I think civil attacks are like, let's protect against identity attacks, basically. So basically, consensus mechanisms are like, when we talk about consensus mechanism, we're referring to the complete stack of ideas, protocols, and incentives that enables a distributed set of nodes to agree on the state of a blockchain. Now, let's try to break this down into simpler terms. When we look at when we talked about the blockchain, right? We said the blockchain a is made up of a distributed number of nodes. So we know that it's not one node that makes up the blockchain. Now there's a problem basically with having a lot of systems or a lot of servers or a lot of computers for tied to form one network. The question is, how do we decide what's valid and what's not if we have plenty individuals? Let's say in the our financial organization, the organization we were referring to earlier, we have a lot of persons. Let's say every single member of this call, how many are we in the call, right? We in the call we are 29 persons. Let's say the total 29 persons are the persons who form this financial organization, or let's say we are the number of nodes in blockchain UNN's blockchain, right? So the question is, how do we come to agreement as to what can be considered a valid transaction within our organization? Like I explained earlier, Jerry is our fintech. He's our chief financial officer. That's quite all right, right? But because we do not want to trust Jerry to do the right thing, we just want to ensure that we verify that all times the right things are done right, at all times the right transactions are what are being recorded, right? So now the question now becomes, how can we come to agreement as to what is valid and what is not? Now, one thing we could probably do is, like I said earlier, since we are a distributed set of nodes, right, we want to be able to ensure that if a transaction is carried out within the organization, we want to ensure that it is recorded in um more than half of the organization members record book. So since we have 29 in the call, if let's say 20 persons have that particular transaction in their record book and 9 persons don't, we can assume that that transaction is valid, and those 9 persons are probably um faulty nodes or malicious nodes, right? So the same thing can happen if in a case where, let's say, Jerry now decides he was going to bribe some certain members of the organization to try to record put the transaction in the record. So let's say, like I said earlier, we concluded that it was 1 million that we needed to run a project, and Jerry wants to add 100K to it, right? To probably to siphon 100K. Now he can meet certain persons in the organization. He can decide to meet 3 or 5 persons and tell them, okay, see, we're going to work together. If we finish, if this thing works out, I'm going to give you like 10% of whatever we make from here, right? But it will be very difficult to bribe every single member of the organization. We want to assume that there are definitely people who want to do the right thing. And then that's one of the important things to consider within consensus mechanisms, right? We want to incentivize people to do the right thing. We don't want to let people, we don't want to believe in the morality of people, right? We want to ensure that nodes are incentivized to do the right thing. So that's why within consensus mechanisms, most times, for example, with Bitcoin, you have a virtual currency, for example, BTC itself, that is printed and distributed to participants that's within the blockchain, the Bitcoin ecosystem, which still uses proof of works, right? To refer to these guys as miners, while within Ethereum, which uses proof of stake, refer to them as validators. So we want to ensure that when we print out, let's say we print out the Bitcoins, right? We want to build a certain number of bitcoins to like miners who do the right thing. Probably you added a new valid block, right? I think within the Bitcoin you earn Can't remember how many BTCs again you earn for adding a transaction to a block, right? So, but basically, the whole idea of consensus mechanisms, just not to drift very far, is to come up with certain a means to attain agreement within a distributed set of nodes, right? It means to attain agreement. Now, when we now talk about this, that's when we now begin to talk about proof of stake, proof of work, proof of authority, blah blah blah, which is like I told you earlier, is the important component within these mechanisms that differentiates one mechanism from the other. All right. So there are two major mechanisms we are going to be looking at in this call when we talk about consensus, right? So we're going to be talking about proof of work and proof of stake. So basically, proof of work is like the original crypto consensus mechanism that was first used in Bitcoin, and even when Ethereum started in 2015, Ethereum used proof of work. It was just last year that Ethereum finally migrated from proof of work to proof of stake in an event known as the Merge, which probably was some of us know about it because it was a very popular event, right? So during the Merge, right, Ethereum migrated from proof of work to proof of stake by joining the execution and the consensus layer to become one. So let's just take a look at this in details, right? Using this particular docs. Let's see if we can find here. Check consensus mechanisms. So basically, just like I said earlier, by consensus, we probably refer to the fact that a general agreement has been reached. So an agreement has been reached as regards to what's valid and what's not. Now we're going to start with proof of work. Basically, I hope. Okay, we're just going to use this instead so that we would keep things simple. So proof of work, like I said earlier, is what is used in Bitcoin and was originally used in Ethereum, but is no longer used, right? So in proof of work, basically, miners compete to create new blocks which are filled with processed transactions. And basically, the winner shares the new block with the rest of the network and earns some freshly minted Ethereum. So the race is won by the computer, which is able to like solve a mass puzzle fastest and produces the cryptographic between the current block and the block that went before. All right, let's try to break this down. I think the proof of work consensus mechanism was originally invented to solve a problem in cryptography, which is known as the Byzantine generals problem. The Byzantine generals problem. Let me see if I can find the results on that. Let's try to take a brief look at the Byzantine general problem. Is a very um okay. Let me see this image. Let's see if I can. So I don't know if you can see this image, right? I was trying to let me see if I can open the link. Not this. Open the image rather. Yep. So we can see we can see this picture clearly, right? I don't know, can we see the picture clearly? Is it like very bright? Because I want to use it to explain something.
Yes.
All right. So, like I was saying earlier, the proof of work mechanism was created to solve a very important problem we find within distributed system, which is known as the Byzantine generals problem. It's also a problem related to reaching agreements, right? And this is what the Byzantine general problem explained in very simple terms. This is how it works. Now you have different. Let's say we have an army of soldiers, right? Who are trying to attack a city. Now, this is a very strong city with walls up above everywhere, right? Now, the thing here is we want to attack this city and defeat the city. But there's a problem here. Now, we are on every side of the city. That's the generals of our army are not together. So you have some generals on one side, let's say on the north of the city, you have the other generals on the east of the city, on the west of the city, and so forth. So we are not together. Now, this general cannot attack and defeat the city alone. If he's going to attack the city, he has to know that he has to be sure that he's attacking it with at least 3 more generals out of the 4 camp. Now, each of these generals, they lead a battalion of army. They lead a battalion of army, you get. But just a single battalion or 2 battalions alone cannot defeat the city, because the city is a very strong city. So in order for them to be able to defeat this city, they have to do it together. Now the problem is each person is far apart. Like the generals are far apart, and the only means of communication is to pass through the city. You get. Now we're assuming that it is not possible or logical to go around the city, or let's say it will take days to go around the city. So for this general now to communicate with this other general, he has to send a messenger through the city. But now that's the question. How do you pass a message to this other general without without being in doubt of your messenger probably being arrested and corrupted, or giving a wrong message to pass to this other general? Because it is possible that when you send your spy or your messenger, on the course of passing through the armies of this particular city would like capture him, and when they capture him, they'll probably torture him and or probably bribe him into delivering a wrong message to this other general. Now the thing here is this general just wants to tell this general the time that they can use to attack the city together. So if they can agree, that's the consensus thing now. If they can agree to a certain time that they can attack the city together, and they attack together, it would be possible to bring down this city. But as you can see here, while this general is probably preparing to retreat, this general is probably preparing to attack, this general is probably preparing to do another thing, this one is probably preparing to do another thing, and they cannot win this battle that way. So this one wants to send a messenger now over to this other person, but he needs to do it in such a way that the messenger can pass through the city without exactly, and get this other person without exactly being corrupted or bribed. And this is something he can do using cryptographic hash algorithms, right? Now this is something that comes to mind. How about let's say this is just how the proof of work mechanism works basically. So the system generates a very difficult puzzle. I'm trying to fit it into trying to explain this, and before we look at the proof of work mechanism, how it works basically. So, but let's assume now the generals themselves, they have this particular code that can be appended to a message to make it valid. We know how cryptographic hash algorithms work, right? So it can be hashed. Once hashed, it generates a digest, and that digest you cannot break that digest, that hash digest, to get the original input that was imputed to get that hash digest, except you originally knew what the initial input was. So basically we can assume that the generals beforehand probably have a mode or a means of communication. So what this general can probably do is he's going to encrypt that message in that mode of communication that all of them knows, right? And he's probably going to use a lot of hashing power to let's say cryptographically hash or encrypt that message and pass it on to his messenger. Now the messenger himself cannot even interpret the message. That's the beauty of cryptography and cryptographic hashes, right? So the messenger himself cannot interpret that message because he doesn't know the initial input. So he's giving the message, and like it is passed to he passes through the city. Now, even if he's captured by the city commanders and he's tormented or done anything, right, it will be impossible to get an information he doesn't have an idea of out of him. So we can assume that if finally he gets to this other general, he'll be passing the right message, right? That's assuming he doesn't get bribed. He'll be passing the right message. Now, this other general, which has an idea of the hash algorithm or whatever it is that was used, he can easily verify that this information is valid. Now, this guy here is going to spend a lot of computing resource to like hash that information, but this guy can easily verify it using any system at all. So basically that's what the proof of work consensus mechanism, that's how the proof of work consensus mechanism aims to solve the Byzantine generals problem. So basically this the miner itself is considered as one general, right? So the miner has to like spend a lot of the system, like Bitcoin itself, the distributed system itself has a puzzle that must be solved by miners in order to mine a transaction, right? Now the miners are going to work very hard. That's why sometimes you see them go get into pools, right? Because some it takes a lot of computing resource to like solve some of these riddles, right? Or these puzzles. So the miner is going to use a lot of cryptographic power, I say computing power rather, in order to solve the puzzle that is given by the distributed system. And if he eventually solves the puzzle, right, the system now is this other general, doesn't need to carry out any much computing power, doesn't need any much computing power to verify that the answer that this general got is the correct answer. So just without diving into more technicalities, that's just basically how the proof of work mechanism comes in to solve like the Byzantine general problem. And the Byzantine general problem, like I told you, is like a very important problem to solve with distributed systems. So it's a way of basically reaching consensus amongst these generals. So if there's a way to effectively pass information without being scared that a malicious messenger will probably pass a wrong information or a malicious node within the system will intentionally pass a wrong information, right? We can be sure that information will move from one general to the other general to the other general to the other general, and the right information is going to be moved. And if the right information is moved, then we can decide that okay, we are going to attack together at sundown, and at sundown we'll attack effectively and bring down the system, but bring down the city basically. But if we don't do that together, then there's a possibility that we don't reach consensus, right? There's a possibility that when we attack, we would rather be defeated because we'll be divided. So that's just the idea of the Byzantine general problem. I'm just going to paste this resource right in the chat, and you could probably take a look at it later. Okay, there are a lot of questions here. So someone's asking, so the nodes make the transactions. The transactions basically are carried out by participants in the blockchain network. So let's say, for example, you carry out a transaction from one person to another. We'll probably understand this better when we get to the section on transaction. But you carry out you carry out a transaction from, let's say, Ali sends Bob a number of eights, right? That's simply a transaction. They are the ones that initiate the transaction. But for the transaction to be considered valid and added to a block, it has to pass through a set of miners or a set of validators who are in another transaction. Someone's asking again, please, what do you mean by transactions? Okay, we're going to explain transactions in the later part of this section. I think that's like one of the last things we'll look at. A transaction is like one of the last things we'll look at. Then all right, so solving the puzzle basically means confirming a hash. So solving the puzzle basically means confirming a hash. I'm not sure I understand the question. Jerry, could you probably unmute your mic and maybe throw more light on your question?
Hello, good day. Um, like what I mean is all these normal, let's say password, all these normal password hashing and the rest. As you hash it, and when you hash your password, you cannot like unhash it. The only thing
Yeah.
that you can do is the only thing you can do is just confirm it. So now, when you say that, you say something about encryption that is cryptographically encrypted. So in a situation whereby all these servers are running, they're trying to find the solution to the puzzle. Does that mean they're just trying to find like different different things, like different this thing that matches the cryptographical hash or what? That was how I basically mean.
So let's at least you have an idea. So let's look at it this way, right? So I said the beautiful thing about hashes is that hashes are one way, right? So we can assume
Yes,
that if I hash the word Jerry and I pass it
yes,
on to another person, it is almost very
yes.
impossible to deduce
So,
deduce that the initial input
so
was Jerry. Ex-
yes, yes,
like it
yes.
to be possible. What's it
Okay.
called again?
So that means solving the puzzle means that different computers are now trying to like confirm whether that Jerry is Jerry.
Yeah, yeah, it's more like
Not
okay. Let's say
actually,
just a simpler thing
not
because are way more difficult. But then let's assume we're now trying to like get the initial what's it called, the initial input that was used to like generate that particular hash. And the reason why verification
yes,
is easier is because if
yes,
the right input is gotten right, it means that the way I can easily
yes,
verify that the right input that is that if I hash the word Jerry, I should have
yes,
the same hash you were looking for or you generated initially. That because if we're using the same hashing algorithm, that means Jerry hashed multiple times, like hashed 1,000 times,
yes,
should give us the same hash digest.
yes, yes, yes.
Yes, basically
So,
that's just what it's like.
all right. Thank you.
Yep. So probably would let's just to round up our consensus mechanisms, but let's try to cover this before we go right. So basically, as I was saying, right, miners are competing to solve the math puzzle which is given to them by the system, and like the first person to like solve it basically becomes the person to add a new block to the chain and would get to earn some freshly minted whatever it is, whether it's Ethereum or it is Bitcoin, right? So that's just basically how it works. And remember, I said you have to incentivize these miners, you have to incentivize these nodes to do the right thing, because without incentives, you basically do not want to trust that they are going to do the right thing. But with consensus mechanisms, basically what makes a very good consensus mechanism is that you try to come up with incentives that can motivate these guys to like do the right thing, because you have to assume the worst when building um solid consensus mechanisms, right? You need to assume that humans are or nodes are by default going to be selfish. They're just going to do things that are going to benefit them. You don't want to believe that they are going to do the right thing for the benefit of the chain or the network in general. So you have to find a way to incentivize that selfishness if you are going to be able to build a reliable consensus mechanism. So now, when we talk about proof of work, right, you probably ask how is this secured, basically, because the problem with consensus mechanisms now is since they are the heart of how the blockchain reaches agreement, you want to ensure that you cannot have a malicious person being able to influence more than 1% of the network. That's what we popularly refer to as the 51% attack, right? Because if a malicious person can carry out a 51% attack on the network and gain more than 51% of the network, the person will be able to like defraud the chain, to carry out to add um fraudulent transactions, malicious to the chain. So basically, let's go back, going back to um the illustration we've been using right before time, right? That's the illustration of having the organization. So we want to ensure that okay, there's still a possible way that Jerry can influence there's a possible way Jerry can influence the organization and still launder money from the organization. And that's if he can convince more than 51% of the organization participants to like launder the money with him. So let's say we have the 30%, 30%. Let's say we have 30%, 30%. Distracted. So let's say no, Victor is asking is Web3 just related to transactions and cryptocurrencies? No, it's actually not. Web3 is very broad, but we're starting with an introduction. So we're just these are the basic fundamentals, and that's where we are going to like start from. Right. So going back to what I was saying, this is actually a bit distracting. Yeah, so I said it's possible for Jerry to like launder the money within the organization if he's able to convince more than 15 persons. So if Jerry is able to convince 16 persons to add a fraudulent transaction to their record book, it is now possible to launder the money from the organization because like I said we have 30 participants, and remember the majority like when we have more than 50%, let's say we have 51% having a fraudulent transaction, when we assume that that transaction is supposed to be correct, basically it's supposed to be the right transaction, right? So if Jerry can get so much incentive to like bribe more than 15 persons in the organization, right, then he would like add a false transaction to the record book and launder money. Now we have to that's one of the things a good consensus mechanism is supposed to prevent, right? A good consensus mechanism is supposed to be able to prevent the ability for like one person to take charge or take control of more than 51% of the network. Now in proof of work mechanisms, right, how proof of work mechanisms prevent these things is that for you to let's say take control of more than 51% of the network, you need a very huge computational power. Like I said earlier, even solving one transaction is not very easy. You need a lot of computational power to like be able to solve the puzzles being thrown at you by the chain. So if you are going to take control of 51% of the network, you need like a supercomputer. For example, in Bitcoin, you need like a supercomputer that has not been invented yet because you're going to need a lot of equipment and energy. And the end, you'll probably be spending more than you would have gained from the whole process initially. And that's why proof of work is like a very reliable consensus mechanism. But then you would ask, if proof of work was that reliable, right? Why did Ethereum now end up switching from proof of work to proof of stake? Now that happened because proof of work, like I said earlier, is very energy intensive. For example, I don't remember, I don't know if you guys remember, okay, as a that was in the space as at that should have been 2021, right? When Tesla just suddenly said they were going to stop accepting Bitcoin for payments because Bitcoin was not what did they say? Bitcoin was not carbon positive or something, and it was affecting the whatever it is, the ecosystem very negatively, right? Because I mean, like for Bitcoin to continue to run your operation, since you operate on a proof of work mechanism, right? People are running a whole lot of equipment, people are running a whole lot of energy. There was one charge I was made certain time that like the amount of electricity and energy used to run Bitcoin is more than the amount of energy used to run a certain country. I don't know if it was Netherlands or so. So a lot of energies are being expended in maintaining a proof of work consensus mechanism. And that was one of the reasons why Ethereum switched, because we believe that if Ethereum is going to like be the future of transactions, right, be the future of finances, it needs to also be environmental friendly. And so Ethereum, that was as last year with the merge, right, switched from proof of work to proof of stake. So now we're going to be looking at how proof of stake works. Basically, that's the second consensus mechanism we're going to be looking at. There's still a whole lot of others: proof of authority, and proof of delegated stake, proof of a whole lot of other things, but we're just going to be focusing on proof of work and proof of stake. Now, how exactly does proof of stake works? In proof of stake, rather than miners, we have what we call validators. Now, these validators, they are block proposers, right? They're the ones who create and propose blocks. And the consensus clients basically request one of transaction as an execution payload from their paired execution clients. All right, so let's just try to explain proof of stake in very simpler terms. You could probably go through this doc later. There's no need to like read it out. All right, so when we talk about right, in this case something, right, most times a certain amount of the native currency. For example, on Ethereum, we it is the native currency. So for you to participate in Ethereum consensus as a validator, right, you need to stake a certain amount of Ethereum. And I think on Ethereum currently that amount of ETH is like 32 Ethereum. So that's a lot of Ethereum actually. You need to stake Ethereum, 32 Ethereum to become a validator on the Ethereum network. Now, basically, how do you think the system like controls and ensures that um the validators do the right thing, right? So I explained very simply. With proof of stake, right? Each time, like once you decide to partake in a proof of stake consensus mechanism as a validator, you stake in certain number of it, and each time you are chosen to propose a new block, right, or create a new block. If you do the right thing, right, you are rewarded with a certain number of Ethereum. But in a case where you are caught doing the wrong thing, right? Your stake in the system is slashed. So let's say you had 32 it and you try to add a malicious transaction to the blockchain, and the rest of the network or the rest of the chain caught that you're trying to do something wrong, your stake is slashed automatically. So a certain number of Ethereum is taken away from your 32 it. So because of that, right? Because humans are naturally selfish, you would assume that they would always want to do the right thing. The right thing is try to like add only valid transactions, right, and instead earn rewards in it. So as your ETH accumulates, right, you can decide, okay, I want to withdraw my total stake. I think with the recent upgrade now, you can decide to withdraw your total stake, right, or just decide to reward the accumulated ETH. That's the number of ETH that you've accumulated on top of your 32 ETH, right? And it's actually a very valid business idea. So, but the problem is where you're going to steal 32 ETH. Or if you have tattoo it, you could try to um right, you could, sorry about that, you could try to ensure that um let's say you could try to actually stick your tattoo Ethereum, become a validator and make a lot of money from it. Right. So how does the security of proof of stake systems work, right? So a proof of stake system is secured crypto economically because an attacker who is attempting to take control of the chain must destroy a massive amount of it. So when you are requiring tattoo it to become just one validator, right? And I think if I'm not mistaken, it currently has over 800 validators. So if you are looking to probably take 51% control of the chain, right? You're looking at a very huge amount of it, which I don't think even Vitalik himself owns. So it's a whole lot of money, and is one of the reasons why it's not exactly possible to carry out a 51% attack on a proof of stake system such as Ethereum. All right. So like I said earlier, when we talked about proof of work and proof of stake, right? We said that. Let's see if there are any questions. Okay. So when I talked about proof of work and proof of stake earlier, right, I said that these are not the only consensus protocols, but we often refer to them as that for just simplicity sake, right? So basically, these are not just the only thing that form consensus mechanisms. But we normally refer to them as that because they are one of the very important parts of the important components that form consensus mechanisms. But in reality, these are actually what we refer to as serial resistance mechanisms and block auto selectors. So proof of work, proof of stake, and blah 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 blah. The ways we decide who is going to like be the author of the next block, who is going to like propose the next block. But another important component in consensus mechanism is what we look at as chain selection, which is also known as the fork choice algorithm. So this chain selection algorithm enables nodes to pick one single correct block at the head of the chain in scenarios where multiple blocks exist in the same position. All right. So to understand the chain selection rule, right, we would need to understand what a fork is. What a fork is. Didn't really add that to the slide, but let's try to see if we can get images online. Well, the fork basically applied it's very simply. Fork doesn't just exist in the blockchain. Right, let's see. Okay, just a good example. Right, so let's just use this instead. Let me open this in a new. Yeah, so basically, this is what a blockchain fork looks like, right? So when you have a divergence from the normal flow of things, right? You had, for example, let's assume this yellow was the Genesis block. So going probably as things went on, right? You now had um a divergence, right? So probably you had some certain number of validators following the old rule, just moving on with the flow, right? But then you now had this new divergence that's followed the new rule, probably added something else. That's what is referred to as the fork. Let's try to define that in more appropriate terms. So when we use Git and GitHub, right, which I believe a lot of us have used, right, there's what we refer to as forking the code. So we say before you make, let's say you are collaborating to build stuff, right? You're trying to build in a central repo. They always tell you before you make changes, try to fork the main repo, main branch, and make your changes there. Then you can now probably apply for a pull request, right, to merge your fork. So basically, fork is more or less something like that. Basically, it's not like I said earlier, it doesn't just apply to blockchains alone, but each time you create like you create a new version or a copy version of an original software, and then you add things to that original version, automatically you've created a fork of that software version. As you all know, decentralized systems to our softwares, Bitcoin, Ethereum, they are softwares. So each time a copy of the chains, right, the blockchain basically is made, and new let's say new modifications are made to that existing chain, right, we call that a fork. And we have blockchain forks like happen time and time and time again. And when these things happen, right, the system has to come up with a means to choose which block to follow. For example, as you can see here, we have this block following the old rule, we have this block following the new rule, and we have to come up with a means to decide what is the right block to follow. I think there are different historical forks that have happened during the histories of blockchain. I think one of the very notable ones happened to Ethereum itself. That was the fork that led to the creation of what we call Ethereum Classic. So for people who have probably heard about Ethereum Classic, so Ethereum Classic was when Ethereum was created initially, right, there was this very popular hack that happened to Ethereum where a certain, was it DAO, I can't remember, lost a very huge sum of money, right? And Vitalik decided that they had to refund the money of these users, which did not exactly make sense, though, following the concept of what blockchains are supposed to be, right? So the Ethereum community splitted into two at that point, right? The Ethereum Classic guy said they were going to they were going to maintain the old rule. They were not going to follow the new rule, right? They were not going to refund the money. Then we had the current Ethereum chain, which refunded the money, right? That's probably minted new blocks, refunded those guys, and continued. So automatically, the money that the hackers hacked was now invalid on the new fork, as a new fork of the blockchain. But it should have probably still been a valid tender with the Ethereum Classic community. And so that was how the Ethereum community was like split into two. For example, Ethereum Classic, or we could say the current Ethereum, is like a fork of the old Ethereum, which is currently known as Ethereum Classic today. So most times this there are certain cases where how would I put this, right? Let's say we as blog proposers, right? Something happened, and for big by one occurrence, which is one of those things that do not happen every time, right? Probably we added two blocks to the blockchain at the same time. So the blockchain has to come up with a way to decide which chain it is going to follow and which one it is going to abandon. So as you can see here, we have this chain which is being followed. So let's say these two guys proposed a block at the same time to add to this guy. So what the blockchain is going to do is the next person who proposes a block, where does he decide to add this? Is it here or here? Is it here or here? And then depending on which chain, like for example on Bitcoin and Ethereum, I think they follow what we know as the longest chain rule, right? So the chain which is considered valid within Bitcoin and Ethereum is the longest chain. So if we are dealing with Bitcoin and Ethereum, right, this chain which is longer than this would be considered the valid chain, right? And every other validator, every other participant within the network will just ignore this chain and just continue with the longest chain, the new longest chain. Let's just go back to where we came from. Yeah, so we talked about how proof of work and proof of stake were CBU resistance measures, and which are used to protect against CBU attacks. So CBU attacks are basically when one user group pretends to be many users, basically trying to like mock the identity of some other persons, right? Is a very popular attack that happens within the blockchain system. The officers are trying to bring up solutions to it. Like, for example, there's a I think the proof of humanity being developed by the world coin guys, right? So, but then just not to divert from what we're talking about, right? So the chain selection rule, like I said earlier, there are two important components when we talk about consensus mechanisms. One is the CB resistance protection, the second is chain selection rule. So the CB resistance methods are where the proof of work and the proof of stake things fall under. That's how we choose who is going to propose the next block, who is going to propose the next block, basically. So but then the second thing we also consider within consensus mechanisms is the chain selection rule. So, like I said earlier, there are going to be certain cases where, because of by probably by one because of one reason or the other, there are should I say there are nodes which are proposed, sorry, there are blocks which are proposed at the same time and exist in the same position, right? So, using the chain selection rule, we can decide which chain is the correct chain. So which chain are we moving with? Which chain is going to be the correct chain, right? So Bitcoin uses the longest chain rule, which is also the same rule that Ethereum uses. And the longest chain rule means that whichever blockchain is the longest will be the one that the rest of the nodes accept as valid and work with. Remember when we talk about blockchains, right? We are talking about blockchain graphical representation. Let me find it. So that's just trying to ensure that using images, you could probably picture some of these things we are talking about and it doesn't look very abstract. Sorry, my network is quite a bit slow. Yeah, basically like forking a repository. All right. Probably we could just use this, since this is like a simpler example. But this is basically how a blockchain looks. The problem is opening this now before this image reloads is going to take a long while. Yeah, so but this is how the blockchain looks basically. So as you can see here, and a block that connected together. That's why they call it blockchain. Nothing very complex. So we want to reach the previous time. I think because yeah, for example, let's say this is the chain of blocks, right? We have new blocks for we just probably these two proposed at the same time, and we're trying to add to this side. Now we're going to probably some nodes or some validators or some miners in the system probably want to go with this other guy, others want to go with this other guy. But the end hold the chain will win and become the valid chain according to Bitcoin and Ethereum chain selection rule, right? Is the chain with the longest number of blocks. So in this case, this will become the valid chain, right? This is the chain we are going to like continue with. So that's just basically how chain selection rule works in simple terms. So since Ethereum uses the longest chain rule too, however, now that Ethereum runs a proof of stake that adopted an updated force choice algorithm that measures the weight of the chain. So the weight is the accumulated sum of validator votes weighted by validator staked ether balances. I didn't even check this. So probably going to look at that in our next class. So the summary of everything we've talked about thus far. It's telling me to turn live. Have you guys lost me? Can you guys still hear me? Because I have no idea why they're telling me to go offline and shouldn't reconnect it.
Yeah.
I'm just
Yeah,
close out this to ensure my network is a bit better. Can you guys hear me?
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
we can. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, someone's asking my internet connection is not the best currently, sure. Okay, but someone's asking what if the two chains are equal? Well, even if the two chains are that's what I was chains are equal, validation if two chains are equal, right, validators are still going to keep trying to add are going to still keep trying to add a block somewhere, right? And automatically the chain in itself is going to algorithmically determine what is going to be the next valid chain, because let's say at a point they were equal, by the next point we should have one chain longer than the next, because one person will add a block before another person, right? And so at that point, the chain will now say, okay, this is now the longest chain, this is now the valid chain, and every other block that was added in the previous chain becomes invalid, and then they have to be redone, right? So be added to like the new block. So that's just basically how the longest chain rule works. Don't know if that answers your question, Peter. Notes. Right. So, well, there, like I said earlier, we cannot cover a lot of things, but really advise that we go through this, right? Look at probably try to read up on this. There's a lot of information within these docs. I think we didn't even go through. There's also the consensus section in the Ethereum book, which you can also check out too. Should also be very helpful. They talked about proof of work, proof of stake, and some other things you probably should check out that we can't look at currently because of time. So I think at the moment we've done justice to consensus mechanism. Like I said earlier, we touched on the data layer, we touched on the data layer, we touched on the network layer, we touched on the consensus layer, and the application. Finally, the application layer basically is where your applications are built, right? You have JSON RPCs, how you interact with your applications on the blockchain, and and so in the next sections, because we are already we have just 10 minutes to go, right? Next in the next class, we're going to start with an introduction to the Ethereum virtual machine. We're going to take a deep dive into smart contracts. We're going to look at blockchain wallets in detail. So we're going to look at transactions, and probably touch a bit into what we refer to as cryptography, because cryptography is like a very broad and very difficult thing. In fact, cryptography in itself it existed way before blockchain. It has been an area of study since like the 1800s, used by mostly the military to like send encrypted informations. But we're going to just take a brief glance at what cryptography is in the broad sense, and just probably take a look at how it is applied in within blockchains. All right. So something I would like to hint on, right? So talk about before we go. So I was asking, what are the technologies we'll be working with, the languages to be precise. We're mostly going to be learning Solidity within the course of this bootcamp. We're going to be learning Solidity, and we're going to mostly be working with hard hat. Solidity and hard hats, basically. Those are the two things we're going to be working with. All right. Then if you go back to check these docs, right, we have the content calendar, which also contains the recommended um resources. So, like I said earlier, during the course of the class, there's very little we're able to touch on, right? So, I would advise you check out these recommended resources. You can see the link to developer docs here. You can see the link to the Solidity official Solidity docs. For now, for this particular class, the things you want to look at is the Ethereum book. Check out the Ethereum book and check out the original docs. Those are two things you probably want to check out that should give you more information on some of the things we've talked about in this class. So just before we go forward, just before we rather end this call, I don't know if anybody have any questions. Jerry, hope you took attendance for the class.
What did you say?
Hope you took attendance for the class.
Yes.
All right. Okay. I can see Chidubim's hand up. Chidubim, could you probably ask a question?
Okay. I want to know whether those recommended Facebook, are we going to get the link on the group chat?
The link, I think I've posted this link over and over again, but I'm just still going to do that again. The recommended resources and content calendar. So you could access the recommended resources at the end of this document. All right. So we'll also post the links on the group chat too. So any other questions?
Okay, Darlington.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, maybe I will download the PDF for the Ethereum book and send it to the group chat.
Sorry, I didn't get you said.
Like the Ethereum book.
Okay,
Maybe I will
okay.
download the PDF file so that I can send it to the group for them.
Okay, yeah, I think that works too. Any of them, they could decide to access from GitHub or any modes. Right, so I guess there are no more questions. We are going to continue this class in the next class, which is still going to happen on Sunday, right? So we're going to try to round up everything about the introduction theory or the fundamentals, and yeah. So after next class, by the upper class, we're going to start with Solidity. I'm going to start doing stuff with Solidity. I hope we learned quite a lot in the class today. And something I would advise us to do, right, which is something that helped me during the course of my own journey, is try to document things by yourself. We've talked about a lot of things, talked about consensus mechanisms, talked about blockchains. The honest truth is most of all these things you're not going to learn them by listening to me talk about them. Some of these things are very complicated concepts. They're the first time you're hearing it. So what I would advise that you guys do is start up a Medium blog page. That's actually very important. In fact, if you can do that, I feel like if you can, I'm going to try to like create a Google form where you could actually submit links to your Medium blogs, or even if we don't actually mandate you to do that, there's no criteria for graduating from bootcamp, but it's really going to help you a lot. You can post them, um you can post them, and we'll would always help you promote them. You can post them. You're always free to write articles, post them to the chat. It would even help you post them on Twitter, and it will help you retweet. And some of these things will help you create visibility. So as you grow, you become visible to potential employees in this space that might be interested in hiring a blockchain developer. It's also going to help improve your knowledge a lot, because for you to write about a thing, you need to understand how it works. And I think as you just do it with time, you'll see that you begin to scale and get better in most of all these things. Right. I think that'll be it. That'll be it for today's session. The recording of the session will be available on the official channel in case you want to on the official YouTube channel in case you want to go through it. So it might take a few days, because it's going to probably take 24 hours before Google will release this recording to me. So probably in 2-3 days, I would upload it to the official YouTube channel. And do let me know if you have any questions. Just ask on the group chat. And I think that'll be it for today. Thank you so much, guys, for coming around, and do have an awesome night ahead. Yeah, good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.